Hello and welcome to Copenhagen Day 2. Well, it was a quieter and pretty much down to business-like atmosphere here at the Bella Centre until around 7 p.m. this evening, when suddenly, as if out of nowhere, we heard lots of chanting and a group of African NGOs took to the corridors claiming that 2 degrees it's suicide. They were referring to the current aim to keep global temperature rises within 2 degrees Celsius, which they said is unacceptable and will leave many African countries unable to cope. They said, to let their voices be heard now before the ministers arrive, and most of the negotiations will already have been concluded. Now, another group that we're going to look at tonight that are trying to put pressure on delegates are the lobbyists. They want to show how their business innovations can really make the difference and help save the planet. And one of the latest green ideas to come around is the idea of a carbon capture and storage.
By the foothills of the Pyrenees, in an industrial complex near the town of Lac, an experimental project is underway. Total launched the first combined CO2 capture and geological separation project in a depleted natural gas field.
This is a CO2 pipe, from where the steam gas leaves the industrial boiler. Contrary to the other boilers, the CO2 doesn't escape into the atmosphere. It travels through this pipe and that big pipe, where it's captured, compressed and sent underground.
Over 2 years, large amounts of CO2 will be injected into a former gas field at Rousse in the Pyrenees. Oxygen from steam produced at the plant will be used as combustion to create concentrated CO2, then compressed and sent via pipeline 30 kilometers away, where it's deposited into rock 4,500 meters underground. Into the local area, Total want to inject 150,000 tons of CO2, equal to emissions from 50,000 vehicles. Supporters say this technique has promising potential in the fight against climate change, but residents have fears over safety and the local environment being ruined.
On sait qu'il y aura des aquifères traversés, risque de pollution de l'eau.
We think it can spoil and pollute the water underground, making the soil more acidic. We want to learn more, and we wonder if they even have the answers to those questions.
On se demande si aujourd'hui il existe des réponses à ces questions.
The main ambition for the oil industry is to provide a way of decreasing greenhouse gas emissions and develop renewable energy sources, helping reduce the flaring of gas, making petrol production more efficient and less harmful to the earth.
Well, joining me now is James Anderson of World Wildlife Federation. Now, Mr. Anderson, thank you for joining us. You were telling me that your NGO gives conditional support to this green idea.
Yes, it is fairly promising, but we have to ensure that it can be done safely by having large-scale tests to make sure.
And from what I've read now, there's a real problem in basically making the carbon into a liquid so that it can be stored. This takes a lot of energy and kind of defeats the purpose in a way.
It does use a tremendous amount of energy, but of course you do manage to capture and store the CO2 at the end. So while there is an energy penalty, it doesn't ultimately lead to an increase in CO2 emissions.
Other people are saying that storing it in the ground, as you were saying, we haven't maybe done enough tests. Can it be very, very dangerous? I mean, people were saying if it leaks up, it could be lethal.
In theory, yes, but this is more akin to the kind of natural gas storage that we already have everywhere. So, in fact, it's likely to be done safely, but again, we have to verify that. And
final question, Mr. Johnson, we'd most be looking for this for help with the coal plants and stuff like that. Is it, in a way, a bad thing to give us support to continue to use coal?
You could see it that way, but we see it as an interim option for those places that are really struggling to find alternatives. Ultimately, we'd like to see them going to 100% renewables, but in the meanwhile, they may need this kind of option.
Mr. Anderson, thank you so much for joining us. Well, as we were mentioning, among the lobbyists, the energy sector is very, very prominent. They're trying to block normally in tradition the negotiations to protect their own interests, predominantly coal and oil. But now, as you're just about to see, this tide is starting to change, and there's a lot of newcomers to these energy lobbyists that are diminishing the power of the traditional bad boys.
Rémi Gruet of the European Wind Energy Association is one of the many lobbyists in Copenhagen. For him, this is a chance to promote the industry.
Everyone who's here on business think they can have an impact on the decisions taken here.
He wants CO2 emissions to be reduced as much as possible. For a simple reason, wind energy could become the energy source of the future. For him, that means non-stop lobbying plus meetings to promote his cause.
We come up with our own position. We try to anticipate the laws that might be passed. That way we can have an impact on the industry.
Gray is a member of BINGO, which stands for Business Industry NGO. Within this group, he is the only member who represents renewable energy on a European level. Facing him on the other side of the spectrum, powerful lobbyists from big oil companies.
In general, those people don't come to these talks to help them succeed. For the past 20 years, they've just come to see. To give you an example, it was only last year that ExxonMobil said yes, climate change has been happening. But for 15 years they were saying climate change didn't exist and nothing needed to be done.
As a result, being part of BINGO can be frustrating, but at least it gives him the opportunity to try and convince skeptics about the benefits of wind energy.
And finally, before we bring Copenhagen 2 to a close, here's something that might really surprise you that's happening on the side event to these summit talks. Basically, as world leaders come to the Danish capital, they're being offered free sex. Yes, delegates have just to show their ID card in order to avail of the offer, which the Sex Workers Organisation has put in place because they were annoyed at the city's mayor for having asked hotels not to provide contact between hotel customers and prostitutes. Well, it's on that surprising note that we're going to have to bring Copenhagen 2 to a close, but join us for Copenhagen Day 3 tomorrow.